So,
hello. So we're not this yet. You've got to imagine we're not wearing these costumes. We're just ordinary
herbalists
people,
here in front
humans,
of you,
in fact,
who met many moons ago on a 4-year full-time BSc in phytotherapy or herbal medicine.
It was super medicalized and was at a time when herbalism was trying to become recognized as a profession, something called statutory regulation, which is where you get a government list of accredited people. Like osteopaths have it, nurses have it. And one faction of the herbal community was pushing for statutory regulation.
Because when you have statutory regulation, you are eligible for private health insurance. So you move into a wider realm of being able to treat different sections of the populace.
And the NHS and the allopathic model are more interested in collaboration. So it was an interesting time. Ultimately, statutory regulation didn't go through, and we actually weren't pro statutory regulation because it missed out a huge amount of lay herbalists who'd been practicing for years and years, had grown up with plants, or maybe were practicing in a different way from the university model. And those people would not have been able to be accredited on that course, on that list. So statutory regulation was thrown out, and largely because the government would have to accept that herbal medicine's actually badass, works, is a viable profession. So,
and whilst we were on that degree, we were medically trained within the Whittington Hospital, where we were made to wear white coats and walk around with stethoscopes, and we weren't allowed to have hair dye or facial piercings.
There was bars on the windows in the treatment rooms.
We were living with burners, so coming in with wood smoke wasn't acceptable because they were trying to conservatize herbalism.
That's a good word.
It is a good word, isn't it? Along with that, they were also looking at plants. We were taught something called a materia medica, which is the herbalist's toolbox of plants, if you like. And in that toolbox, it was full of plants like andrographis, echinacea, ashwagandha, ginkgo, plants that
ginseng
aren't part of the Western herbal medicine world. They've just come in, and we didn't have any heather. There was no heather, which is one of the most prolifically growing plants of these isles.
There's something like 90% of the UK have moorland as the main ecosystem, and heather is one of the main plants that grows on that acidic soil, and it had fallen out of use in favour of some of these more far-flung plants. Common daisy that grows in the grass, Bellis perennis, was not on our materia medica and is a herb that is freely available to all. And there was this hierarchy, this elitism being created. We were told that we were paying for our knowledge, and therefore it was a precious commodity that we were the guardians of. And it didn't sit right with us.
We had a whole module on business and ethics that was taught by a medical lawyer who we were in a big lecture theatre with the medical students as well, the allopathic medics, the nurses and the herbalists. And she opened the lecture saying that if you are going to harm someone, make sure it's not a man in his prime, because that's where you're going to lose the most money. And that's the way we were trained in medical ethics. Yeah, that's what we all did. Where are we? And then we were told that the only way we could set up a business, the only model of business for a herbalist, is to rent a premises, get a loan, buy your herbs in, and then you can sell them to the public with set prices of how much you can charge. And we were like, we want to be community herbalists.
That was the only model that we were allowed to follow for our business project, because we wanted to create a market stall to reach people, to connect with people. And they say categorically, no, you can't do it as a community interest company. And we were just blown away by this teaching as the model for going out into the world as a herbalist. And when you fall out of that model into the world, you realize that you're actually part of the private healthcare system. People have to pay to come and see you. People didn't even know what herbal medicine was, so they weren't exactly queuing up outside the practice door. And it was a very strange time for us, coming out of this passionate subject that we loved so much, to find this quite eerie, weird, barren landscape at that time.
It was weird, wasn't it? So we've done things in our own way.
And we haven't always followed the rules. And we think that the powers that be don't always know what is best for humanity, for society, and for community. And we've tried to forge our own way in creative ways to try and reconnect people back to plant medicine. We did form a community interest company. We do give grants for community medicine gardens. And all of our work is about furthering access to plant knowledge.
And nature's story is ripe to be told.
And creation is thirsting to hear it.
Through our actions.
Above the din.
The white noise.
The kerfuffle of humanity.
Would you like to meet two big hitters of the hedgerow?
Would you?
Would you?
These two big hitters of the hedgerow. This here is my friend Apple. Poor Apple. She's got a chip on her shoulder, you know. Terribly neurotic she is.
Who can blame me? I don't really like any of you humans. You call me Malice. Malus domestica. Domesticated evil, you dub me. The beginning, the original sin. That's what you call me, but you don't really know your own minds, do you, you schizophrenic, psychotic race? You also say an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Make your minds up.
Don't you think that's a little confusing for her? I mean, come on, make your minds up. And anyway, I go by the name of Damson. I'm a wild plum.
The sugar plum.
But you lot, you trendy foraging types, you're off out. Sometimes even just going to the supermarket shelves, buying my older, poorer relation's slow.
Oh, leave it out.
Picking her off the hedgerows, putting her in gin, leaving me to rot in the hedgerows.
She's come a long way, Damson, all the way from Damascus. It means well-watered place. A long time ago, and you've forgotten about her. You're ripping her up.
Yes, you've ripped me up just down the road, you know. You pulled up an ancient damson tree to put up a Tesco.
There's a giggle, but it's true. It's really true. Over 90% of our British orchards have been ripped up since the war, since the 50s. 90%.
And you ship in apples from all around the globe. If only they'd plant us again.
If only.
Remember those days when the orchards...
When people celebrated us.
They were in every village, every town, libations they did.
They didn't import tons and tons from Africa and New Zealand. Has anyone eaten any New Zealand apples lately? We're in a minority.
And those sweet apples that spike your sugar levels, pushing you into ever more dodgy states of well-being, when we're here in the hedgerow with our pectin-rich sour fruits just waiting for you to come and enjoy.
Rotting on the floor at our feet.
Even the birds leave enough for you humans, and you still leave us rotting on the floor.
And there's a little thing called editing. They've been editing me. Anyone like or fancy being edited?
This is just because she's got a crush on Hawthorne. He's a strapping fella. He's very practical, and she's always on about how gorgeous he is.
And I thought a pert little bum lift. He might see me better.
She's been talking about a GM bum lift. She just can't afford it because
It's not GM anymore. It's genetic editing since 21.
They changed their mind, didn't they?
And I've been edited to not brown because nobody likes it when they bite into me and I go a bit brown.
No, they don't want to cut out little places where you've been battered and bruised, do they? They want a nice, sweet, juicy apple. That's what they want.
And how about the plum pandemic? Have you heard of that?
Plum pox pandemic?
It's big.
They genetically edited me as well, you know.
And that's why we're seeing this rise of stone fruit sensitivities and allergies, because all of that stone fruit's been being edited for quite a while now.
They cured one problem and created another. Typical. What are they like?
Goes back to that species. Mm-hmm.
So, those poor little hedgerow trees, they have a hard time, you know. And it's really important that we get back connected with the hedgerow.
And what we've seen or what we've looked at is since the 50s, this eradication of so much of our wild food and medicine being torn up alongside the growth of the NHS. And
the NHS was an amazing and is an amazing facility that we have. And what we have seen happen is that it's unfortunately eaten itself as more and more people have become reliant on the NHS as their first port of call.
And forgotten that health is our own responsibility. And because we have this fantastic resource of free healthcare, we looked at what happened pre the 40s, what was going on here, and found that there was a huge percentage of lower income households that had a copy of Nicholas Culpepper's Complete Herbal in the kitchen on the shelf.
And even by the time the war came round, they were having to re-encourage people to start foraging. It's a bit like the modern day phenomenon we see now. There was pamphlets produced for how to get people back out and foraging because there was trade embargoes, there was challenges meeting certain nutritional needs during the war. So they create pamphlets to go out, harvest rose hips, bring them to the pharmacy. They'd then create them into syrup, and that was a source of vitamin C when there was a lack of oranges. But they'd already then were having to reconnect people back into foraging. And then the NHS came in and this further disconnection happened.
And we've been working hard to re-educate people. The social enterprise that we created has at its heart an aim to support people to recognise their local weeds, all of the plants that grow up. Potentially, even in urban situations, it's the plants that grow up through the cracks of the pavements that often hold the strongest medicine.
And like with our foods growing in the soil that helps to imprint the microbes within our digestive system, the plants that grow in the area that we exist in learn to be resilient to that environment. So they grow and they develop really quickly. They can alter and morph into their environment. And those plants often help the health situations that can arise in certain damp conditions or dusty or dry, because the plants develop their constituents. They change and shift the levels of their constituents in order to respond to their environment.
And we've brought some native hedgerow superfoods for you to try. I think Amy and Victoria are going to come around. These are in tinctures, so if anyone doesn't take alcohol, you can just put a drop on the back of your hand and rub it into your skin and smell it. If you're happy to take alcohol, you can have a drop or two on your tongue. And they contain crab apple and hawthorn berry.
And sloe.
And we call this mix a recovery remedy. And the recovery is something that we've forgotten to do as a culture. Our cult isn't about stopping and slowing and convalescing from anything. Our cult is about carrying on and pushing through. And we had some fantastic people come on a workshop, and they were talking about the London Bus Company used to have convalescence homes in Bournemouth. And when any bus drivers were unwell or had an operation, they were sent to properly convalesce, sometimes for months. And one of the stories was so beautiful. A gentleman had had a heart operation and was in Bournemouth for 3 months recovering. And he remembers that the water was placed in the sunny window ledges. It was that level of attention to detail that their water was infused with sunlight.
And then bit by bit, convalescence got forgotten about. The original word recreation was from recreate, was to re-nourish and restore ourselves. So there would be parks that were about recreation, about re-nourishing. And this whole system of resting, recovering and restoring from medicine almost became forgotten.
And now we just have recreational drug use as terminology in our lexicon. And when we take that apart, what does recreational drug use mean? And that's something that we've been working on reimagining, and it becomes a way of being creative together and nourishing our communities together.
So this tincture that's going around, we just encourage you to really tap into the flavours. The plants speak to us in many different ways, and when we look at a hedgerow, we see a diverse web of plants that provide nourishment and support for other animals and creatures, for humans, but also they provide this protective barrier of resistance. And we worked out that when we're fighting for what we believe, we became exhausted. And
anyone else burnt
anyone
out?
Else experienced that?
Anyone else tired? Anyone else wants to rest but can't because there's too much to resist?
So we have been looking at ways of encouraging and reintroducing this idea of restoration. And much of that is about reconnection with your local plants, with the hedgerows around you. And what we see unfolding is when people start to recognize that it's not just a green verge, that there's a multitude of different medicinal plants in there, that they start to open up their eyes and become more caring and conscientious about our wild green spaces. They want to protect them more and plant more.
And when we found out that huge percentage, 90% of our orchards have been ripped up since the 50s, we also found out that there's massive funding schemes cross-country to replant orchards. So we got in touch with the local council. We now have 28 acres that we lease from the council. And there's an 8-acre orchard in the village that I live in, and Fi's setting up another project. And for people that are interested in growing projects, please get in touch with us. We'd like to signpost anyone. We were massively lucky. We got a grant of nearly £80,000 from the Landfill Trust. And the orchard's now in its 11th year.
But we also understand the pitfalls of running community projects, and again about this idea of burnout, and that it's really important that the structure is set up in such a way that people's time is properly valued, because you end up with one demographic that has time on their hands when you don't have proper funding to support people either financially or in other ways within the community project. So we've got lots of ideas for helping and supporting. We're busy applying for funding to actually get a really detailed resource pack together for community medicine gardens. But we also do offer a couple of small starter grants for community medicine gardens each year that can be applied for. And anyone that doesn't receive the grant, once these resources are set up, will have full access to those resources as well as a community project, so that we can stop the repetition of all of this work in every single project going on to try and help to support this network of amazing community projects.
Has everyone had a drop or some of the herb? Put your hands up if you need some and signal. But this recovery remedy is really about our whole community coming together and finding spaces to recover together. And the herbs can support that. We talked about the hedgerow yesterday. These are spiky plants, the sloe and the hawthorn. The crabapple has her spikes as well. The rosehip intertwines, and they stand together arm in arm in the hedgerow, supporting one another.
So we set about putting all of the way we wished we'd been taught at university, that encompasses creativity, connection to the plants, drawing, characterization. We do make people dress up as plants on our courses. We take them out on plants sometimes. But they a much more creative way with the science layered in. So how can we understand the tastes of plants? What constituents within the plants those tastes might indicate? What actions that might give the plant?
So, for example, has anyone got a dry mouth after tasting it? Does anyone feel a dryness? You feel a dryness? Any time that we feel our mouth pucker, there's tannins that are interacting with our mucous membrane. So tannins are a class of compounds within...
A scuzzy compound.
A scuzzy compound that makes your cup dirty, but has this astringent action.
So that astringency can help to draw tissues together to help support inflammation within the body. So when you start to experience these tastes and sensations, you can start to, build an understanding about the language of the plants through your sensory experiences, through your taste, through how the plant grows, what grows around it. And then those physical actions give us an indication as to how the plants work on a more spiritual, emotional, psychosocial. In fact, what messages do they have for us as a society through learning about their plant constituents? And we can really layer up this holistic picture of the plants, this understanding of them.
Because sometimes it's a fear for people who really want to study plant medicine, but they have throwbacks from school perhaps, or don't think they're very scientific, or they're not very literate or academic. And our senses inform us. It's just another language. So when we smell, we've talked about taste, with scents, when you think about the herbs that have those highly aromatic scents, like the rosemary and the sage and the thyme, those plants create those aromatic oils to protect themselves from pathogens, to protect themselves from beastie bugs that might want to nibble at their leaves.
To even protect themselves from the sunshine in some instances. But the plants develop these protective mechanisms. They're known as secondary metabolites. Primary metabolites are the ones that are involved in their growth and their reproduction. And these secondary compounds are ones that protect and support that growing process. And these protective oils that you can smell protect the plant in some way, and therefore we know that they'll protect us in some way. They're classic herbs for sore throats, for coughs, for colds, for infection. But they also have a long history of use as being more spiritual, energetic protectors.
That cleanse spaces and keep all the beastie buggy microbes out of the spaces, protecting us.
And we've heard a lot of new age spiritual call for if you have an idea that you need protection, then you're going to invite challenge. But we just copy the plants. So we reckon it's really good to have your eye on how you're protecting your projects, your work, your own health, your energy, and really learning from the plants about how we can walk forward with all of our different missions and quests that we have in here today. And we can really reach on the plants. But whenever we work with a plant, if we plant something back in the ground in return, that same plant, a different plant, get involved in a community project, then there's a reciprocity there. We're connecting with the earth as we're taking from the earth.
And we've created tons and tons and tons of resources.
We're prolific, one might say.
We've been overachieving for years.
That's why we're so exhausted. Where's the...
Quick, a bit of that. We've been writing books. We've been writing books for the last 17 years. Our third book project is coming out next May. And then we might have a rest. But our new project now is going to more spaces that do not know anything about herbs. We've been at festivals this year where people don't know stinging nettle. Lots of people don't know what stinging nettle is. People have never thought of drinking herbal teas. And by dressing up, by being silly, by being ridiculous, by attracting people in,
it's terribly serious what we're doing.
It's very serious.
We had a little plan. So we go around different communities, like the yoga community, the druid community, the green community, of which we kind of are inherently part of anyway. But we'll go into different groups of people and say, hey, anyone thought about plants? And those people that are interested will come on the herb walks, they'll come to the talks. So we're gathering people from all these different interests that might also be interested in the plants. It's not everyone, but that's what we've done for the last 20 years.
Because we've been saying the NHS is being disbanded for 25 years. We've been standing up, talking to people, saying the same words. And we are seeing huge shortages in medicine. Our practices are seeing people that are finding it difficult to get their allopathic medicine at the moment, and it's only going to continue. So
it's chaos in the pharmacies. Has anyone been in a pharmacy recently? Utter chaos around ours.
And we are losing nurses at a vast rate. We need to be our own first port of call for health. We need to understand what our ancestors knew by rote, not that distant ancestors knew by rote, so that we can support ourselves and communities. And also learn the surgical skills that have been in our hands for centuries.
And not walk past the sage plant that's growing in your garden and go to the doctors with a sore throat and take up 10 minutes of their time, thus putting further pressure on the NHS. And this work of love that we created was the way we wish we'd been taught. It's an entry level, but also in depth into some of the herbs and body systems, for getting connected with plants, for learning how to understand some of those basic tastes and ideologies, the way that we practice, the way that we walk through the year with the plants, spring, summer, autumn, winter, and spirit, which is the whole year through.
And that was an amazing achievement, because has anyone in here heard of Datura? Datura is an infamous plant who got a bit of a bad rep in the 70s and 80s. Carlos Castaneda brought Datura through his books to many, many people. At that time, the punk movement burst, and nearly every high street health food shop stocked Potter's asthma cigarettes, which contained belladonna and Datura. So there was a vast swathe of seekers, spiritual seekers, who went out to experiment with Datura and burnt themselves. Our emergency rooms were full of people who had gone too far with the alkaloids.
But Datura is a herb that we work with in clinical practice for asthma, for spasm in the bronchi, even with children in the correct doses. But it has this reputation for causing this delirium that you might never really come back from. But as a powerful medicinal herb, we decided we wanted this book to be accessible, so a relatively straight book that could go out into bookshops across the place. And our ultimate goal was to get it in the National Trust bookshops.
Which we did. It's in the National Trust with Datura, proper information.
And the last herb that's in the book is Datura. And the first paragraph says, I met the SEED Sisters in one of their famous witches' circles. And we were like, because we were trying to keep it all low-key, but the forward ended up outing us. But so this book is a really great starter book to get friends, family, kids out there making recipes from the plants. And then this book, this is where we came out. This was our coming out book. Was our poison prescriptions book, which is all about those edge-walking herbs, the Datura, the belladonna, the henbane, that are powerful, powerful medicines.
But the education had been lost. And people, so we have several herb farms that grow the herbs, that produce the remedies, that serve the medical herbalists of the land. And those farms were stopping to grow Datura, belladonna and henbane because people weren't using them. And that's because in the 60s, the 1968 Medicine Act turned herbal medicine into a profession. Before, it had been an apprenticeship, much more a skill base. There'd been
vocational.
A herb shop in many different towns, and you'd get the recipes passed on from the herbalist. And the majority of recipes contained one of these plants because they are pain relievers. They're antispasmodic, they're anti-inflammatory. You need very small doses for them to be extremely efficient. But that Medicine Act made the dosages standardised.
And what happens when you legislate? People become fearful. They become fearful of the plants that are put on the register of the list of these ones are slightly dodgy. So you can only treat people with them if you're a practitioner. And what happened was, bit by bit, practitioners all but stopped working with them.
And we were very lucky because we were trained by people who had been working pre-1968.
Oh, almost the last generation. The tutors that we had that taught us how to work with them left the year that we graduated from university.
So that meant that subsequent years, herbalists weren't taught about these plants. And one of the herbal medicine charities is called Heartwood. They're a charity for education. And one of their clinical leads got in touch with us and said, would you write a book or would you write a course?
Would you write a course?
Because it's people are going to forget.
And we did. We wrote a course and he was just like, whoa, you need to put this in a book. You need to put this in a book. So we did, because we do what we're told.
Always.
And the idea is to re-educate herbalists about the clinical workings of these plants, to re-educate our alternative scene about the connective possibilities of these plants.
And also to move away from ayahuasca and peyote. I don't know if anyone's been playing in those fields, but we've got plants of our lands here that grow around us that are very powerful and very spiritual and very sacred.
And alter your consciousness, but you don't need to take massive koshes of them. You don't see people just walk around boshing ayahuasca here and there with a
Glastonbury
pint.
Greenfields.
Glastonbury Greenfields, Mo's. Oh, yeah. Oh, and that psychedelic conference,
festival.
Prague. Yeah, all right, you do see it. But these herbs, so when we always say that any ritualistic processes are developed in response to the land, the plants and the people of that time. And when we tap into the plants that grow here, what we see is a wild, chaotic, quite unpredictable culture that we have here, a bit like the weather. And these plants, for us, perfectly represent this rebridging between the magic of our culture and the medicine of these plants.
As we said, we were trained in a very clinical way. We were trained to be clinicians. When we were taught herbal medicine, we were told that herbalism has nothing to do with witchcraft or magic.
By someone that had green DM boots on, we were really confused.
The medicine, any medicine that's practiced needs both magic and clinical expertise.
In our humble opinion.
Yeah, we need to be connected to the plants that we prescribe for people. We need to understand and know them as familiar friends. We need to know their songs and understand the spells and the ways that we can concoct our brews.
And we are also interested in how plants can make you feel at place. So disparate communities that come to a different land, what plants can we grow that are of their lands or that are similar here, that have the same purposes that they can know and understand and share their knowledge about as well. And there's projects we've been looking into about restoring and reconnecting people through plants to this land here as well.
But we've got time now for some questions.
There's just one thing first. So we said we were prolific with our blog, and we send out newsletters each week with what's going on in the world, with recipes. And if you'd like to sign up for our newsletters, we're going to pass them round. Don't feel obliged to sign your inbox away to us, because we are prolific, we'll be warned. But we we get, there's so much of this information that we gift because we want you to be connected to what's growing week on week, month on month in the UK in particular. But yeah, do, and if you have any projects or want to write for us or anything, do get in touch and let us know. But we can take questions now, I think.
I've got a very practical question, which is in your books, does it tell you how to actually use the herbs, like what to practically do with them?
Yes.
Thank you. I've just seen so many which says this is really good for this.
No,
and
this
you go,
one,
well, but how do I do it?
This one's got a whole chapter on how to wank with plants.
It's our proudest moment. Wanking ritual. Is that what you were looking for?
That's a selling point.
This one's got some recipes from the hedgerow that you can make to treat your family with.
Yeah, this one takes you through the year but teaches you or shows you how to make a tincture, which is an alcoholic preparation, a vinegar, a flower essence,
a bread,
oxymel,
even
to dry
food.
them. And it's interchangeable with the other herbs, and it goes into depth in the body systems as well.
And if we upset you at any point when you're reading it, just write to us and we'll make a blog on it. If you're like, I wanted to know more about that, then we're open to that as well.
And this one goes into our flying ointment, so the European preparation that is a flying ointment, and how you can plant and grow all of those herbs, make your own ointment, and different ways to work with it, meditatively, divination, healing ceremonies, dance, and self-pleasure.
Cool stuff like that.
Just a quick one. What's a flying ointment?
Ooh. Have you seen a picture of a woman sat astride a broomstick? Has anyone ever seen a woman flying on a broomstick? And which way?
Has anyone ever had a broomstick that you've had for many, many moons and it goes really smooth and tactile?
Has anyone looked for an implement to insert in themselves? Ever? It was okay.
Well, we call the flying ointment hallucinogenic lube. And it's a preparation that is notoriously famed for giving you a sense of flight when you imbibe via the skin this preparation. And it's created from a lot of the herbs that are in the nightshade family that have these alkaloids, these tropane alkaloids, these alkaloids that have the potential to shift and change.
But this is an ancient European preparation that was used all over, and each area would have had a slightly different recipe depending on what was growing on the land.
And it also is an amazing medicine for pain, for neurological pain, for toothache, for backache, for knee ache, when you apply it to the nerves that are feeding that pain. So it's a recipe that would have been worked with, and variations of this recipe would have been kept, and the knowledge of how to make these complex preparations. You're talking in the early modern period and before. And if you were found with these medicines on you, even though they're powerful external medicine, it could deem you a witch because of the power of those herbs that were in them. And the story goes that the women would wank with the broomsticks, with the ointment applied to them. They'd fly and meet together on these sabbats and have these amazing parties around a fire. And that's the original image that we have of the flying hag that became the dodgy, evil woman to be feared. So all of that kind of story that we still have and that we still tell our children in the fairy tales of the dodgy old witch comes from repression of the complex herbal knowledge that we used to hold.
And the plants have been oppressed and repressed alongside the feminine. And you see in many different books, Datura, Hembane, Belladonna, skull and crossbone, poisonous, and no other information.
So that quick question we can probably talk for about 3 weeks on. But we do have a book.
Yeah, and
that's
a
all
time.
about it.
Super inspiring talk. Thank you so much. I just wondered if you are looking to kind of become a professional clinical practicing herbalist, are there any specific courses that you can recommend at the moment?
Yes.
Yes.
So we run a foundation year in herbal medicine, our style, and that foundation year is taken by many of the professional courses as a foundation instead of theirs. So it's a route in that gives you this kind of creativity rather than going straight in for the clinical training in the foundation, because we cover that. But there is a brilliant school, the Irish School of Herbal Medicine has turned into a branch called the School of Herbal Medicine, something like that.
But
and
if you write to us, we can signpost. If anyone wants to study herbal medicine, send us an email and we can signpost you to all of the schools that we know about. There's a few. There's Lincoln University too.
And so, where they're based, because they've got branches in Scotland, in Devon, in Ireland. There's schools in the south near Hastings. There's Lincoln in the Midlands. So there's like nationwide, there's lots of different. And then there's Nathan Hughes in Stroud. He does a much longer course as well. But yeah, if you write to us, we're very happy to help facilitate any interest in training in herbalism. There was a question here.
Hi.
Hi.
I got one of your lockdown pamphlet and experimented a bit. I made some rosehip syrup and a couple of tinctures, but I don't feel very confident. Like, how long do they last? I had a rosehip syrup that I opened in January. Is it still okay to eat? I don't know. So that's my question, please.
It's very dependent on the process. So we all say if you forget or don't sterilise your bottles efficiently, if you make a syrup, they will go off. They will mould. So a syrup generally lasts less time than a tincture, but it depends on the methods of making them and how they're kept. A tincture will keep for donkey's years, kept in a cool, dark environment. But sometimes the herbs can start to denature. So the tannins, for example, start to precipitate out and form a big block at the bottom. So you won't have any of the tannins left in the tincture.
As a general rule of thumb for you, if you're making stuff for yourself and your family, a year is enough, because the following year you're getting a new gift of all of the plants.
Don't hold on to your precious tinctures. Like, you work with them and share them, and and next year you'll know how much you've worked with, how much you've used up in the year, and you'll be able to make more of that and less of that next year. So yeah, but tasting and getting used to it. Syrups go mouldy or fizzy. Tinctures go kind of floral and weird when they've started to denature. So the more you work with them, the more you just get tuned into it. And to be honest, it's all a bit of an experiment, because, one person's kitchen, one herb that's come from a different bush that might have something on it. It's a very variable process, unless you're in a lab with plants grown in very quite sterile ways. We get a bit upset at the thought of plants being grown as monocultures and never hanging out with other plants and sharing their mycelium. And we get a bit like, about that.
Hello, thanks for your talk. We were part of a very distant project called Local Agenda 21, which was back in 92, I think it was. And we've morphed into what is now called We Act in our local area, which is Woking Environmental Action. We have just been recognised as a charity. But trying to get grants, I know nothing about, because I would love to set up a community herbal garden. We're trying to do incredible edibles, but even that, we're in Woking and the council is bankrupt, so there's no grants or funding. It's all been withheld and withdrawn. So I'd really appreciate a lead on, if we're a charity now, can we still claim grants?
Yeah.
Yes, you can still claim grants, but something that we did in our local area, because there was no funding at all, was we crowdfunded. Someone that was a volunteer suggested it and put it out, created a page, and it was really amazing how many people wanted to support the orchard. So it's well worth exploring the crowdfunding model as well.
Oh, and I would say, just as a quick note, that when you're developing a plan for a project, trying to make it as self-sustainable as possible, grant funding's great to set up, but it's not guaranteed. and if you run out of grant funding and a project fails because of it. So anything that you can get going that might be renting out the space to groups to come in, or selling some of the produce, or whatever it might be that can help to top up the income of the project, can be really helpful as a starting point. Funding's not easy to get, and you often have to jump through loops. So you might have a space, and it might be for education. So you've got to say you're going to run so many educational events there, and then you can work with some of that funding to put some infrastructure in place, or there's ways around it. But it's a whole art, and it's really good if you can get someone that's proficient in grant funding on board with the committee. That really helps.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question.
Next to you.
What I'm seeing more and more of, if people want training in herbalism, but with terrain theory. So is there any courses where you can, rather than look at it a germ, in a more terrain theory?
That's what we do.
That's what we do. So much of medical herbalism as well, you will find is, because herbal medicine here, as taught in universities and what it is, actually a very big mashup of lots of different roots. And a lot of the herbalists here, a lot of the tradition actually went to the States. Eclecticism came back over here. And there's quite a lot of a mashup when you actually look at the roots of herbalism here. But holistic medicine in this country, as we know it, or as we were taught at a university, looks at the whole person. And within that, the idea of terrain is that you've got an internal landscape that might be hot and dry, that might be moist. And when you look at herbs with their qualities, you're either working with the body or applying something that's opposite to help to readdress and rebalance that terrain. So without always knowing it, herbalists are often treating terrain and don't necessarily call it that, but it's certainly something that we bring into our teaching as an ideology.
That was really, really interesting. And everyone, I'm sure we would like to
Thank you.
Thank you.